Dragons of Ascension, the world of Wormterra. The ancient texts provide vague answers to the beginning of this world. It is known that Exolitus and his 6 Ascended found this place devoid of life, and as they had previously done to other dead worlds, unleashed their breath upon the land. Though it is not exactly known how or why this process works the way it does, it is known that once the breath of these 7 dragons covers a dead realm, it paves the way for life to happen. Thus was the beginning of this world, many eons ago. Once their breath was spread, these dragons then left this world for a long, countless era, until life on the land had began to grow and flourish. Once it had, they returned, and instead of leaving again to go create life-making conditions elsewhere, they decided to stay. From what they have told scholars, the general location of this place was ideal for them to create a throne world for all dragonkind. The coming of the ascended dragons and their numerous hosts have shaped the land to become what it is today. All natural life adapted to them and their needs. The Ascended have major cities dedicated to their thrones. Christ Cognatio and Umbra Lunar rule the northern lands of the central continent called Phelion, also home to the Elves. To the south of them lay the lands of Flaremoor, ruled by Infernus Alpha. The kinder forests and plains of this land are the home of the Halflings. The smaller easternmost continent of Fulon is ruled by Tempestato Mist. Its jagged mountains are home to the dwarves. The great ring of isles between the eastern and westernmost continents and the surrounding waters thereof are ruled by Invocabo Aqua. Finally, the westernmost continent of Ulysia is where the God King's throne resides. Exolitus and his mate, Seraph Aria, are the primary rulers of this land. The great metropolis is a melting pot for all creatures, but humans generally reside in the northern parts of the continent. Rare creatures are scattered in smaller communities throughout Wormterra, and all are subject to the Ascended. The sacrifice of Saint Estella and the spread of the great magics to the world. During the earliest days, where the thrones were yet young, and the humanoid races were still very primitive, the Ascended left Wormterra to breathe life into other dead worlds. They left the world in the care of their firstborns. What they did not at the time expect was the coming of the banished Ascended, Noct Mortis, to Wormterra. His addiction to death was uncanny, and he came to fulfill his cravings for necromancy. He quickly spread death across the world. 3 great dragons, seeing the threat that Noct presented, rose to stop him. The first was Lasternagoth, the firstborn of Exolitus and Seraph Aria. The second was Takalos, the firstborn of Christ Cognatio and Umbra Lunar. The third was Estella, a formerly orphaned crystal holy dragon and mate to Lasternagoth. They organized the rest of the dragons on Wormterra to deal with the threat of one who was considered equal to one of the Ascended. Takalos would lead the attack, taking most of the necromantic dragon's fury. Lasternagoth would stay back to organize the protection of the lesser races. Once they were secure, he would join Takalos as reinforcements. Estella worked on healing the land and restoring the places where Noct's blight had done the most damage. This would thus weaken his influence and make him easier to defeat. The battle against Noct was a fierce one. He had already gained an upper hand with a large portion of blighted land. Even the combined efforts of Takalos and Lasternagoth were not quite enough to force the banished Ascended from his assault of the world. Estella, realizing that the only way to truly defeat Noct was to rid his blight upon the land in almost an entirety, paid the ultimate price. By putting her own life into her healing, her undying love for this world overpowered the blight. It was the first great sacrifice of the world, where it was learned that to give one's life into a spell created the singular strongest form of magic. This act gave Takalos and Lasternagoth what they needed to drive Noct away from Wormterra. However, given the cost of such an act, they found no real satisfaction in it. They mourned the loss of Estella. The sacrifice of Estella did much more than to simply heal the land. Estella's mana was vast and potent. By putting her life into the land, her mana spread throughout the entire world, granting the gift of magic to the primitive humanoid races. The term saint was a rarely used term among dragonkind. Such a concept would not be adopted by them until centuries later, when the humanoids of the land created rituals to honor Estella. Exolitis, in respect of her, and out of love for his firstborn, later on made the sainthood of Estella official after hearing the lesser races honoring her. The rise of the ancient teacher and the creation of the pacts. The effects of dragonkind were their own. As such, the lesser civilizations dare not question them. However, dragons were also not permitted to interfere with the lesser humanoid races. But, with these primitive races given the gift of magic, Lasternagoth felt it necessary to give a limited amount of guidance. He taught small pockets of each race basic techniques of control, then sent them back to their own homes to teach others. After surveying the remnants of the humanoid civilizations, Lasternagoth found a group of orphaned children whose parents had been killed by Noct Mortis. Feeling sympathy and understanding their loss in comparison to his own, he raised these children as his own and taught them many of the same spells that he knew. Because of this act, humans referred to Lasternagoth as the Dragon Father, or the Ancient Teacher. When the Ascended Dragons returned, they learned of the events that took place. Lasternagoth's actions were against the decree of his father. However, given the nature of the situation, and the extent of the loss felt by the firstborn Ascended, Exolites decreed that the interaction between man and dragon was ultimately necessary, but also needed to be restricted and regulated. As such, he created the concept of pacts. Humanoid nations who learned the arts of the 6 paths would require a pact with one of the Ascended Dragons before they could progress beyond a certain level of expertise. The dragons would then set forth tenets and principles that these pact holders would abide by. More importantly, beyond these pacts, dragons would not interfere with the affairs of humanoid civilizations beyond any direct threat they had against them or their lands. That being said, there were pockets of humanoid life that came to directly serve in the throne cities of the Ascended. These are directly beholden to the dragons and their rule. In return, they are compensated for skills that humanoids seem to have a better talent in than dragonkind. It was from these throne cities that the magic of the 6 paths was passed down to those who were not of dragon blood. It spread to the humanoid nations in a matter of 300 years. As for the orphaned children that Lasternagoth raised, they were given a special blessing by Exolitis himself. They were, after all, the children of his firstborn. These orphans would take on the shape of dragons, with wings and tails, and they were thus given the power of the voice of command. Thus, the first voice shapers were made. Loomis Epsilon and the tragedy of the voice shapers. During the beginning times of the system of pacts, there were 2 human nations. The first was Ulysia, which is still an active nation today. The second was Lumus Epsilon. This was the home nation of the Voice Shapers, the human children adopted by Alastonagoth and blessed by Exolitis. The Voice Shapers were in essence mostly human. They required humans to produce more Voice Shapers, as couplings between two Voice Shapers could produce no offspring. As such, humans were treated equal to Voice Shapers. Humans, after all, were their fathers, their mothers, their sons, and their daughters. The influence of Lumus Epsilon spread far and wide, and theirs was the first great civilization. Wanting to protect the pure humans in their nation, those who were their beloved family, they created the means to transform the souls of the departed into great weapons. These Epsilon weapons, as they were come to called, chose their wielders after their death. The chosen wielders would eventually become part of one of two orders, the Order of the Pure Heart, which focused on the defense of the nation, and the Order of the Strong Mind, which focused on the development of the strength of the nation. The two orders would work together to stop a great many threats to Lumus Epsilon. One such threat was Kale the Mad. Kale was a voice shaper that researched into the deep secrets of magic. In so doing, he discovered the secrets of the lightless art of necromancy, and had entered into a pact with Noct Mortis. However, Kale soon adopted the same addiction to death as the banished Ascended had. This drove him into insanity, and forced the two orders to deal with him swiftly. Thus was the beginning of the great tragedy. Kale, being a voice shaper, was made into an Epsilon weapon and chose a wielder named Ather Zaparti. Ather joined the ranks of the Order of the Strong Mind, and for a long time followed the rules and did not draw attention to himself. He became known for his genius and created many innovations in the combat arts. However, once he found himself in a station of influence, he began to gently manipulate the heads of the Order of the Strong Mind. The Order of the Pure Heart, who had sensed danger in Ather and had growing concerns, went to the Order of the Strong Mind and pleaded with them to strip Ather of his status and banish him from the Strong Mind. However, at this point, Ather's influence had become too strong. The Strong Mind refused. Eventually, Ather rose to become the leader of the Order. For a time, the relationship between the two orders, albeit uneasy, was still peaceful. Ather had done nothing directly to risk the safety of Lumus Epsilon. However, the Order of the Pure Heart became concerned when a few of their numbers began to disappear without a trace. They accused the Order of the Strong Mind of doing something to their numbers. Ather and the Strong Mind refused to take the blame. Tensions began to escalate, worrying the ruling voice shaper families. They attempted to mediate between the two orders in order to bring peace to the land. However, when one of the leaders of the Order of the Pure Heart was found to be dead in their office, killed by an Epsilon weapon, tensions boiled over, and the two orders plunged Lumus Epsilon into a civil war. The voice shapers, caught in the middle of all this, and seeing the souls of the departed used to fight in this war, tried to intervene. They called a conference with the two orders in order to demand that they stop the conflict, threatening to dissolve both orders should they refuse to back down. During the conference, Ather accused the voice shapers of being the ones responsible for this, saying that it was they who planted the evidence to start this war in order to have a reason to dissolve both orders. As such, both orders turned upon the voice shapers and began to slaughter them. This singular act caused many Epsilon wielders who wielded the souls of dead voice shapers to lose their weapons, reducing the number of Epsilon weapons by a significant margin. This did not stop the two orders from killing voice shapers, however. Rather, it caused them to increase the rate at which they hunted them, needing new Epsilon weapons to keep their numbers consistent. The remaining voice shapers fled to other lands as the violence only increased. The war between the two nations left Lumis Epsilon in complete ruin, and eventually the Order themselves, unable to bring themselves out of more than just a stalemate, eventually slaughtered each other, with only Aether remaining. Thus was the final design of Kale the Mad, to bring ruin to the nation. The war between the two nations left Lumis Epsilon in complete ruin, and eventually the Orders themselves, unable to bring themselves out of more than just a stalemate, eventually slaughtered each other, with only Aether remaining. Thus was the final design of Kale the Mad, to bring ruin to the nation that killed him. To complete the design in its totality, Aether turned to hunt the remaining Voice Shapers to extinction. The Ascended Dragons, upon watching the events of this tragedy unfold, and seeing the great sorrow of Lasthernagoth, whose adopted children were the ancestors of the Voice Shapers they slaughtered, decided that they would not allow history to repeat itself. They would no longer give such great blessings to those raised by dragons, even dragons as great as the Ascended, or the Firstborns. As for Aether, they say that he is still hunting Voice Shapers to this very day, though no Voice Shaper has been seen for hundreds of years. Wormterra's present. Wormterra's lands live in relative peace today, with few conflicts outside of smaller tribal races, and the threats that are present from the blighted creatures such as goblins and trolls. Each humanoid nation has its great metropolises, and their own laws and customs. The throne cities of the dragons are places where multiple races come together in servitude of the Ascended. In the end, all races, whether they be humanoid, blighted, or otherwise, remain beholden to the Ascended Dragons, and to Exilitis, the God King. Glory be to the Great Ones.